Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. Today's episode is very special to me and very near and dear to my heart. Today, we have two amazing women with us, Dr. Christine C. and Amy Polacko, both domestic abuse survivors who have turned their experiences into such a powerful force. They are here today to talk about their new book that's being released, Framed: Women in the Family Court Underworld. A little bit about Dr. C. Dr. C is a board member of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence and a founding member of the International Coercive Control Conference. She's a college professor teaching in social work for over 20 years and is the creator of the Protective Parenting Program, a program to support protective parents navigating parenting children harmed in a coercive, controlling environment. Amy Polacko is an award-winning journalist and investigative reporter. She's also the owner of Freedom Warrior Coaching and has coached hundreds of women going through the divorce. She runs a support group and writes for national news outlets about coercive control, domestic abuse, divorce, online dating, and singlehood. She created a digital course, Divorce Decoded, to educate divorcing women about the process, warnings, and family court, how to divorce a narcissist, and tips for avoiding devastating mistakes, particularly within the family courts. This episode is not just for those going through divorce with a narcissist or an abusive ex. This is for everybody, so that everybody learns what the red flags are, what is going on in the family court system when it comes to custody in particular, and knowing how to navigate it when you have very little support behind you. So I think this episode is going to be so informative. Again, I'm honored to have both of these amazing women on, and I think it's going to be extremely helpful for all of you. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. Today, I am honored to have these two amazing women with me today to talk about their new book. I'm just going to hand it over to you guys because I will not come close to doing this justice. So please start and talk about your new book and who you are. Amy, we'll start with you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Polacko. I'm a divorce coach and journalist and co-author of Framed. Our book is called Framed: Women in the Family Court Underworld. And, we do this work every single day helping women, and these women's stories have tugged on our hearts. So we're so committed to getting them out there, to educate women and warn women out there, which I know, Dr. Z, you do so well on a daily basis.
I always say it's like preventative medicine. This isn't just for people who have been in these relationships. This is for people who haven't, because it doesn't matter how smart you are, how successful you are, how much you think you know, we are all susceptible to this.
Exactly. And we want to validate for those going through family court injustice that we see you, we hear you. I have been through it myself. I've been divorced not once, but twice. And that's why I became a coach, to help women avoid the mistakes I made. And I think, as you talk about so well, everybody's healing journey is different. And for me, it was getting back to journalism. And I used to be a TV reporter in Philly. I know you and I have talked about this, a shout out to KYW there. But trying to shine a light on these issues, domestic abuse, family court injustice, divorce, coercive control, has helped me as much as it has helped the people I have written about, hopefully.
Awesome. Dr. C, you're up.
Oh, thank you so much for having us on the show. We really appreciate it. This book is a passion project. I mean, we have a hope to create a groundswell. We have 22 amazing contributors who were brave to share their stories. Of course, they all have pseudonyms, and we've changed identifying information. But the goal is, to your point, is to really, hopefully, prevent others from getting into these circumstances. And also a 5-alarm warning about what can happen when nobody signs up up for an abusive relationship. I started this work when I was 19. I've been an advocate my entire career and did not know that I was with an abuser for 27 years, 11 months married to the person. It was very covert. And so as a domestic abuse advocate teaching on this every semester, I missed the signs. And so how is it that I always say to people, I'm not trying to be haughty about it, but if I missed it, I teach about it. How, and I'm a therapist. On top of it, I was helping people leave relationships that were abusive. But again, oftentimes we're looking through the violent incident model, and violence does occur in these relationships, but it's when they can no longer exert control otherwise. And these abusers are extremely savvy. And our stories are from a diverse group of women who really shared their heart-wrenching experiences. And as you know, we asked them, tell us the beginning. How did you meet this person? Mm-hmm. What were they like? Because again, these people don't show up with signs saying I'm an abuser. And then from there, when did you start to have those signs? And as we know, they will exert more control when they think you're slipping through their grasp. That's exactly what happens. And they use the family court system to wield this control. As you know, we have a very prominent case going on right now in the United States of a mother who was trying to protect her children. And when she objected to reunification therapy, she's put in jail every weekend as a punishment. I was just telling Amy before the call that I've heard of a mom who was trying to protect her children in court, and she ended up having a seizure because she has epilepsy. He was trying to keep the children from her because she has epilepsy. Like, that makes her a bad parent. Doesn't, of course. And they took her out in shackles out of the courtroom and put her in the hospital in shackles.
You know, I see the comments on, you know, especially the case with Rachel that's going on now. And I see the comments that people are writing, you know, and understandably so, how could this happen? And it's so, it's always a reality check for me when I see these comments, because I think we're so in it, right? So we know this happens all the time. And not that we're immune to it or not, but it's expected. But when people make these comments and they're horrified, it's great, don't get me wrong, because it draws attention. But the part that really is a reality check for me is how many people think this is abnormal. And that's the part I think that is so just jarring for me, is that it's so common. And the fact that people look at it as so bizarre, and then to have the realizations, no, this is what's happening. It's very jarring, because it's evil. And I think what ends up happening too is that this is why survivors don't speak out, because who's going to protect them? They're not going to want to get thrown in jail. They're not going to say anything. And then it perpetuates the cycle. And I can't blame them for it. But I think books like yours and the information you guys are sharing is so critical, not just for people to recognize signs, but also for people to understand that people get you, people see you, and there is a way to get support. But unfortunately, for this type of covert abuse, it's a very particular way in which you need to go about obtaining support, right? It's not the normal way to reach out and you'll get it. It's a very different way to have to get it. And if you don't know that blueprint, I think that's where people get, you know, feel so unbelievably supported and not hurt.
Well, that's why, Amy, I was just going to say, that's why we call it Know the Abuser's Playbook. The title. Go ahead, Amy, because I'm sure, yeah.
No, I just wanted to say that I think, Dr. Z, you hit the nail on the head, is that these stories will be shocking to people. We hope they are. This is the overriding reason we wrote this. Yes, we want to validate and support victims, absolutely. But we want the masses to read this. We want the masses to hear about Rachel Pickrell Hawkins and be pissed off, frankly. So by the time they get to the call to action at the end of our book, that they are committed to doing something about it, because it's going to take more than us in this world. I really believe it's going to take, like every great social justice movement, it's going to take us, you know, marching in the streets. And as we speak today, in a little bit, they're going to be protesting in Colorado about her case. And, you know, I think we're going to need to see that across the country, because every mother and male allies should be enraged when they hear these stories.
Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, again, even us being in it and reading it, and it's just evil. That's the only word that I can come up for it, is just pure evil, because logically there is no reason for it. And I think that's the part that always got me, was why are you doing this? There is no logical, empirical data to support any of this except your own preconceived, irrational notions about how families should be. That's it.
To your point, right? So when you were beginning that conversation, I'm thinking she's talking about the abusers, but then I realized you're actually talking about the system too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the system.
Right?
Absolutely.
And
The system.
it really does boggle the mind. And I think, we have wonderful pieces of legislation that are crossing the country. We have coercive control codified now in 7 states. I mean, what does that mean? That means 43 states, unless you have a bruise, you are not considered a victim, which is just insane when we understand that coercive control is the underpinning of it all, and that that's how they gain control. But we also have Cadence law, which is amazing and is supposed to protect children in these situations. But the problem is that we can educate till the cows come home. And first of all, is education looking through the violent incident model, which is problematic.
Can you explain, you had mentioned that before, and I want people to know what that is and why it's not always most of the time, not a healthy model to use. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So we have historically believed that when a woman has a bruise that they have suffered, when a child has a bruise, it's how child welfare looks at abuse of children. They have to have a bruise. And so that's the determining factor. But the reality is, think about it. Every single time a parent is trying to discipline their child and they're doing so angrily, it's really about power and control. Every single time, racism. What is that about? That's about having power and control over other people. And so then does it sometimes become physically violent? Absolutely. When I can no longer control you through gaslighting, manipulation, intimidation, isolation, I'm going to move on to other ways. Sadly, rape. What is rape really about? It's about power and control, child sexual abuse. So really looking beyond the violent incident model, knowing, and I think what people mix up a lot, I was just doing a reel on this earlier today, is this idea that they think it's invisible abuse. Coercive control is invisible abuse. No, it's not. We just have to look beyond the violent incident model, but certainly intimidation is not invisible. Stalking is not invisible. Somebody calling you horrible names is not invisible. Those are visible, tangible things that once you're out of it, you're like, oh, that was abuse. So really, I think what is sad is that a lot of the domestic violence trainings that professionals take, I've been an advocate since the age of 19 at an agency local to me, and the violent incident model is used over and over again. And so when judges are getting trained, if and when they are getting trained, they're still getting trained through the violent incident model.
And by the time that behavior happens, it's oftentimes too late. Once you escalate into that domain, that's, it doesn't just start there. It starts way before that. That violent phase is, the end of that. And I think that's what, again, to your point, what people aren't understanding.
Right. And I might just add that we need to pivot to the perpetrator. And I think that's what you're doing all of the time, is we keep saying, why was she abused? And we could talk about how I have a podcast called Perfect Prey, because I do think perpetrators prey upon people, right? But this idea that we have to start educating on the pathology of abusers, because that's what the trainings need to be, frankly. But I'm going to stop there.
Can I just add, Dr. Z, that going back to your question, why are they doing this? Well, I think there are 2 other factors, right? We have these misogynistic tropes about women, that they're manipulators, they're out for revenge. I wrote about this for Ms. Magazine, right? Using the Fatal Attraction, Glenn Close example. So that is ingrained before they even enter a training. And then number 1 reason, money. People are making a lot of money, right? We hear this all the time. In these stories, you will be sickened by the amount of money these court professionals are making in these situations, ripping families apart, and the devastation to the women and the kids who are, Rachel Pickrell Hawkins is living in a domestic violence shelter. I mean, doesn't that tell us everything we need to know
and
about
the Kasanoff case? I mean, he, that was, he's millions and millions of dollars to these quote professionals and these quote psychologists who I always say, and I'll say it here, should be ashamed of themselves. But it's not just that, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars that professionals are being paid to essentially lie and to make the abuser look as if they have done everything they possibly can, and that it's the other parent, the healthy parent, that is manipulative and that is abusive and that is, quote, alienating the children from them. So with regards to your book, can you talk a little bit about how the idea of coercive control is so unbelievably missed, and how these abusers weaponize family court to their benefit, and what that actually looks like?
Once somebody has gone into that place where they're going to be exerting power and control over various facets of someone's life in a pattern of behavior, that is coercive
That's the
control.
key. The pattern.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, it's the pattern of behavior and unwillingness to take responsibility. And, we could add in Darvo there. They obviously, the accusation is the confession. There's just so much of that going on. And I think, to the point is this idea that the courts actually then become complicit in emboldening the abusers. They actually will align with an abuser because he comes in with his tie, or because, frankly, just because he's a man. He doesn't have to be a professional. He has to be a man.
Yes.
And there is so much empathy in the court system. Yeah. And this idea that as soon as a man shows up and expresses a desire to have a relationship with his children, he's golden. And that's problematic, because what has been the history of the parental subsystem? That's what I always go back to. Let's just take a look. Let's look at Amber Heard. Like I was on her amicus brief. I mean, you said these psychologists and these social workers who are doing so many egregious things, as Amy referenced, the court professionals are complicit. Deb met with the psychologist who testified against Amber Heard at his house for dinner and drinks before she was hired. How is that even allowed? How? I just can't even. So, yeah.
I had a situation where somebody I knew was going through a divorce with a very abusive man, and she was very bright, had a whole career. He wouldn't allow her to work, and so for 20 some years she never worked. And then when they were going through divorce, to not have to pay her, he privately got a vocational analysis done for her. And vocational analysis, and as I'm watching this happen, I was like, this is not going to be good. This is not, because I already know what's going to happen. At the end of the evaluation, said to her, I need a hug from you. I'm so sorry. This is so horrible what you went through. Like completely unprofessional, and tried to form a bond with her and talking about her experiences. Wouldn't you know what the report said? It made her look like she was this just money hungry, did nothing with her life except work out at the gym. And it was so unbelievably, not only unprofessional, but so manipulative, and just, I think, so telling of what these evaluators privately will do just because they're getting paid for it.
Absolutely. I think that's a narrative we see all the time, that she's a gold digger. I've had clients like that one has 2 Ivy League degrees, took one for the team so he could travel the world, going to the top of a company we've all heard of, raised their 4 children, and then was called a gold digger in court. Okay, after everything she had sacrificed. So that's all part of the narrative. And you asked, what is kind of their playbook, right, Dr. Z? And this is part of it. They file all these vexatious motions. They file ex parte emergency orders that can sometimes be temporary, or they're supposed to be rather, but they end up being permanent. We often think that somebody should be able to open up that family court file and the evidence is right there. If he's filing and he's on the offense and you've got like 50 motions, isn't that telling the judge everything he or she needs to know? But believe it or not, time and time again, they're not reprimanded. That's why it's called an abuser's playground, because they're like toddlers. They can do whatever they want.
It's their stage.
Yes, they delay. They don't file their financial affidavits or their papers. If she doesn't, there's hell to pay. I mean, there's such a double standard. Like Dr. C said, the empathy is apparent daily.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk about some of the, I know their names have been changed for their protection. Can you talk about some of these amazing women's stories and what it was like even for the two of you to put yourself in these situations, because that had to be difficult too.
It definitely was, and it's been again, I think we just both became so passionate about. I mean, Amy and I together have this book kind of came together pretty quickly when you think about it. We started this in the fall, and it's because we have been working tirelessly to make sure that we could get these stories out. And I mean, I guess I would just say that I'm going to tear up just a little bit because they're just heartbreaking. And the problem is, though, like when I heard Rachel's story, which is absolutely heartbreaking, we have a story in here like that. I mean, how many times have mothers called me and said, I know he abused my child this weekend. I know he did, but I'm afraid to call child welfare. And I'm having conversations with people about the advantages and disadvantages of actually getting child welfare engaged. How is this the world that we're living in?
How are we here? Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you talk about some of their stories and maybe, read a little bit from the book, and just hold up the book for our viewers again so they can see? Yeah.
This is our printer copy, so it's got our advanced copy. Sure, I can read from one. It's Michelle's story. It's actually called The Abuser's Playbook. And, she's almost 5 years in right now and simply wants a divorce and cannot seem to get one. But I think she does a great job of describing how the abusers play the system. They know when to stop, in other words. So she says, the reason why I couldn't send Jeremy away is he didn't cross the line. We need to move the line. He'd get in my face, spit, threaten me, pull me places, and lock me in a room. But I didn't have bruises, black eyes, or broken bones, so he wasn't arrested. It's time to move the damn line. I had proof of him locking me in a room, and he should have been arrested. But the police couldn't arrest him because coercive control is not illegal in my state. And if I didn't have an incident of physical violence, there was nothing to report. Jeremy was stalking me, following me with a GPS tracker, but somehow the police believed him when he said, she's abusing me. In one instance, the police came and took me to their station where I spent an overnight in jail based on Jeremy's claim that I was on drugs and dangerous to him and the children. My husband waved through the window with a sick smile on his face that said, I told you so, while they carted me away. He also called the station repeatedly that night, asking if he could pick me up. Every time I tried to leave, he called the police and do the same thing. This happened at least 6 times. The scariest part is they often believed him. And I have to add here that this woman is a top executive of a company. She's highly educated. She presents globally to thousands. If you saw her, you would never believe that the police would not believe her and her character, but they didn't.
And it's not as if the husband is giving this foolproof evidence either. That's the thing. It's not even like they're giving evidence that really is difficult to not side with. Literally, they're not giving them anything except words.
That's true. And to your point a few minutes ago, Dr. Z, when you say that people are shocked about what goes on, I think one of the hardest parts for us, Dr. Z was talking about the coaching and consultations she does and I do with women thinking about divorce or starting the process is I sometimes have to tell them, I see these signs that if you don't call the police soon, he's calling on you. And you just see their face. They're like, what? And I almost have to tell them, be the harbinger of bad news, because they have no idea, because none of us would have thought this. I didn't. Going into family court, I started seeing things going on. I'm like, what? This is America? And so, abusers take advantage of our ignorance as women, right? They've got this system on their side. They've got the tricks up their sleeve. And that's why we're so passionate about educating every woman, every young woman, every daughter, every sister, mother, sons, men, everyone needs to know.
It's interesting you say about the daughter. So I have 3 kids, but 2, I have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old going on 19. And I will never forget this. We were watching, it must have been about 2 years ago, we were watching Frozen for the 100th time. And in one scene, right, they have Anna and the prince or whoever he is deciding to get married immediately after they met because they could finish each other's sentences. And then towards the end, you find out he kidnaps her, he wants to kill her. I mean, and then I started thinking about all of these Disney fairy tales of, they meet, they fall in love, or Snow White, he's kissing her while she's sleeping. And it's funny, but it's not. And it's this idea we're putting in our kids' heads from such an early age, particularly the girls and the boys too, that that's what love is. And that if they turn on you, like Beauty and the Beast, she's captive, but then she falls in love with him and feels bad for him. I mean, these are the stories that we're putting in so early on. So it's so systemic. It's so much bigger. And even though this seems so silly and insignificant, it's not. And I had to explain to my then 7-year-old why that's not accurate, because she was loving that was happening. And I had to explain it to her. And I think that it's as ridiculous as it sounds, like that's where it has to start. I mean, you can't break these messages if they're constantly being drilled in. And there's a reason why they are. And it puts these women at a very young age at a very big disadvantage, because it's like they're going up against so many big ideas that have been drilled in for so long.
And our readers, when they read these stories, will see that these are our first stories called Fairy Tale Gone Wrong. But all of these stories are fairy tales gone wrong. Nobody went into it thinking it was going to be a fantastic relationship, right? And Tina Swithin wrote our epilogue, and she says, this book should be a prerequisite for all women.
Yeah.
Should be read before marriage, but definitely before divorce or child custody proceedings. And I think, to your point, we have to raise young boys differently.
Yes. That
they don't have to have this pressure to be finishing a girl's sentences and that's how they show they love. I mean, our young boys are not oftentimes not allowed to be authentic and vulnerable, and how harmful that is. And as you know, that creates some of these traits that we're trying to prevent. It's, there's a lot of work to be done, but it's not that hard, honestly. What the heck? This isn't rocket science.
No, it's not, but you're asking this patriarchal society to give up control, and that's what it comes down to. That's what has to be given up. I mean, the information's there, the research is there, the data is there.
You're absolutely right. And I think Disney is a perfect example, not to bash them, but we have notes at the end of each chapter, and in one of them we talk about that specifically, because the rom-coms and that whole Disney fairy tale is imbued in our culture and it's in our society, and that's what we would have to change. Because I think many of the women, all of the women in this book, are smart women, and you will see that in the way they write, in their perspectives. It's not that they were dumb and got duped. And I love to bust that myth that it's the down and out people who fall for abusers. But when they saw maybe a pink flag, and I know I can speak for myself too, in my situation, I thought, well, isn't this how it's supposed to be? I mean, when you meet the one, this is what we're told. Maybe I just hadn't met someone this great before, right? And you discount some of these warnings.
Absolutely. And I think it's also a myth, to your point, and for you and for so many other women that we've worked with in our careers, coercive controllers don't go for weak, timid women. They go for very smart, strong, successful, confident women because it's more of it's more supply for them to bring them down and to strip them of their sense of self. I mean, they like that type of person on their arm. They like to be in that community and take that spotlight. They're not, it's I find this often. The reason why I think these women are viewed as having low self-esteem and quote broken down, that's what you see at the end of the relationship. That's not who they were in the beginning at all.
Bingo. I love that. I love that. Absolutely. I mean, you don't go into the relationship broken. We all have our stuff, right? But, we also live in a world where women are meant to be a little bit more caretaking and agree. I mean, this is the thing. This is what we know about victims. There's a huge research study that explains that there's a high agreeableness and conscientiousness. Conscientiousness means you like to fix things. You like them to work. You work hard at things. Frankly, those are really great qualities. Abusers capitalize on it all of the time. Yeah. Yeah. I had a very full career, life, etc. But I would go home and I was the scapegoat. I would be pushed down, and then I would go to work and be appreciated. And so, and I have great extended family. This isn't about coming from an abusive family either. It can be, but it doesn't mean those are the telltale signs. And we need women and men to really understand that. If there's men listening to your podcast, and hopefully there are, right? I know you have a great following. I mean, we want them to get this book for themselves to read about what their daughter could go through. There's an Ohio representative, one of the representatives there. I am aware that his daughter is now going through it. And that's where the shift becomes, right? We have many men in positions of power in society. Many are good. Many are bad. We need the good guys to stand up, to have these conversations.
And I think you're right. When it happens to them, and this is true of anyone, when it happens to them or it happens to their family, that's when the changes start. Yeah, unfortunately. But can you read one more passage for people just so they can get a sense again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just have to say, Governor Polis, if you are listening, we're waiting for you to do something right in Colorado. So, yeah. So this is Janice. She's from Canada. We have stories from all over the world. We always have people, I know Amy has this experience all the time too, where they say, it's just really bad in Ohio. It's just really bad, or it's really bad in Florida. And we're like, yeah, it's bad everywhere. So, my legal team didn't acknowledge his abusive behavior. My children were unable to see it clearly. And I was wondering what I had gotten myself into. No wonder victims stay. On top of this, as is typical in these types of cases, Jerry was using the legal system to financially abuse me, and the system was aligning with him. Post-separation abuse rearing its ugly head. This experience, the betrayal by the system, was as brutal as living with Jerry. I mean, as brutal as living with him, right? And this is exactly what Jerry could have hoped for. He and his lawyer intentionally stalled the legal process until my older two children aged out, so I would likely not be able to bring in his abuse of me and the children or police reports referencing this. Throughout my legal battle, I call it a war. My lawyer told me that I had to play nice and not reference abuse. Additionally, my lawyer subsequently refused to read up on or take any training on coercive control unless I paid for it, even though the Canadian Divorce Act changed in 2021, referencing coercive controlling behaviors as family violence. I was advised that I should stop trying to prevent Jerry from spending time with my youngest and to simply end the proceedings. My attorneys, like most, was more worried about his reputation than the safety and welfare of my youngest child. I retained an expert from the United States who recommended I have full decision-making and sole parenting until my ex acknowledged the abuse and attended a treatment program. The expert included references to famous studies such as the Saunders study and adverse childhood experiences study. My lawyer, days after he filed my expert report, told me that he wouldn't be disappointed if the other side had the report kicked out because he was worried about losing his own credibility with the court.
I shake my head, but yeah, I that's just gut-wrenching.
It absolutely is. So the institutional betrayal is really, this book is really, it's institutional betrayal over and over again. And how, as you know, from a clinical perspective, the trauma is already so immense. Amy and I work with these people all of the time. I know you do too. And then add in that the system has become complicit in further traumatizing you.
I wonder, in your experience working with women and men too who are going through this, do you find that because they have been abused for so long in ways that flew under the radar, even for themselves, do you find that it takes them equally as long to realize that there is abuse continuing within these institutions because they're not expecting it?
I would say yes, because I think there's that cognitive dissonance that we all have. No, this couldn't be happening. They're supposed to be for me. They're supposed to believe in me, to the point in that story. I had a client whose own attorney finally said the quiet part out loud: I'm not going to die on a hill for you. And it goes back to the money and their reputation they want to maintain. But before it reaches that egregious level, many times there are attorneys who are demeaning and abusing their clients and not sticking up for them. And if you're already a victim of abuse, you can't tell. You don't know if your attorney's on your side or not. I help a lot of clients try to discern that, right?
I had a client who, when my client was talking about the abuse that was going on, and it was a female attorney, which for another discussion, but she actually said to her outright, if I had $1 for every woman that pulled the abuse story, I'd have a closet full of Chanel bags. Verbatim. I said, get another attorney. Get another attorney. I mean, and this is from a woman. It was just, and again, I should know this, but every time it happens, it is so unbelievably shocking.
And we write about that in the intro. I think I use the words, this is not an anomaly, it's an epidemic. 35% of women in the world suffer violence. That's the violent part. How many women then are suffering other forms of abuse that are not physically violent, are beyond, right? I mean, how many? And then how many children? So this attorney is clueless. People are living either through rose-colored glasses, or they're so freaking arrogant. They don't belong in the courtroom trying to support people through family court. And I think to Amy's point too, is a lot of victims and survivors think, all right, I'm going to get what's fair. Justice is going to prevail. They look through that lens, because going back to being agreeable and conscientious, if you're a good person, then isn't the cream's going to rise to the top, right? That's what my sister always used to say to me. The cream's going to rise to the top, Christine. And the reality is that in family court, it doesn't always rise to the top. And that, I'm a mom, I'm worried about my kids. I really don't want 50-50. I want 70-30. Well, the problem is that you're probably not going to get 70-30. And the more that you try to get it, you're actually going to be again and again accused of being the controlling one, the confrontational one. And all you're actually interested in is protecting your children.
That's right. And that's what gets lost. If you look at the actual behaviors, right? You always hear me say that. Look at the function of the behaviors. And if you actually look at the function of the behaviors and compare the healthy parents' behaviors to the unhealthy parents' behaviors, and you look at the function of them, then you see the truth. But what happens is nobody's trained to do that, right? We know to do that, but nobody's trained in that family court system to do that. And so on the surface, it's going to look like it's in the unhealthy parent's favor. I mean, you know this, the attorneys will tell these survivors, don't mention the abuse. The judge doesn't want to hear it. Don't mention the abuse. And and your head's about to explode, because what do you mean don't mention the abuse? Almost as if they don't want to be bothered. They just, because the truth is most of these types of cases, they don't end in mediation. I mean, these are the ones that are dragged through for years. And so by the time they get to where they get to, they don't want to hear it. And then these women are silenced even more. The post-separation abuse, as you talk about, goes. Actually, can you guys talk about that actually for a second, the post-separation abuse and what it is, but how it's manifested within the courts? I think that's an important thing for people to know.
Amy?
Well, I think it manifests in a myriad of ways. A lot of it is trying to destroy the other person financially, right? You are filing so many legal motions that you are depleting their resources, not paying. not paying child support, not paying alimony. I tell all my clients, if there's any way that you can, negotiate for less and get a lump sum, that's the way you want to go with these types, because they want that control over you. And it may sound like a great 10 years of alimony, but if they only pay one, you could spend more trying to get that money, right? So it's stalking, it's using the children as weapons. It's impossible. When people say, oh, just co-parent, you can't. They're counter-parenting. They are, saying things to the kids about you. So, I mean, it takes all of those forms. For many women, the hell just begins, when they get divorced. And sometimes people in their life might say, like, well, you're divorced. What's the problem? It does not, you are tied to that person.
And I think it goes to your original point when, we talk about why don't they just leave? This is why.
Right.
This is why.
Right. It's easier to stay. I mean, not that we want victims to stay, but
No.
the point is that there's no judgment if you stay, because we get why
Correct.
you might stay. I think the idea is to be as engaged in the court as least as possible, because, when you start bringing in court professionals, Amy and I see this over and over again. What they do is they just say 50-50 anyway, and you end up paying them lots and lots of money for them to just determine 50-50 regardless. I have a mom who her daughter protected her from being thrown down the stairs. And because this child wants nothing to do with her father, the mom is being accused of alienation. And at this point, we are at the point now where I've been supporting her through this process. And at this point, she's going to be happy if she gets 50-50, because the alternative was that she's an alienator and she loses all of her time with her child. And so this child is going to be forced at 12 years old now. And all I keep saying to her is postpone as much as possible going back to court if you can, because your child will be older and hopefully the court will begin to listen to her. But it's absolutely overwhelming. And what we know now, and research affirms this, a 2017 or 2018 research study by Sharps, Jeffs, Kelly, and Renata Klein said that over 95-ish, 90%, we're now saying 95, of people who have suffered coercive control in the relationship. So if any of your listeners have experienced someone trying to exert power and control over them in a pattern, whether it's gaslighting, manipulation, intimidation, and they need to know that is probably going to intensify post-separation. They call, Myhill calls it the golden thread. It is a thread that links together these cases in the family court system. And so knowing that, this is the key, right? This is awful news. This all sucks. We know that, we can acknowledge it, but knowing it is a lot better than going in blindly.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do with Framed.
I think essentially, Dr. Z, I hope we've made this point today that women are damned if they do and damned if they don't in many ways. If you stand up for yourself, if you try to protect your children, you are penalized. We talked about they have to play nice. Women have to play nice. There is this overwhelming, along with the misogynistic tropes, feeling that just go with the flow. And Catherine Kasanoff is the perfect example. She fought for her children. She fought valiantly. She had some wins. And ultimately, she took her own life after 4 years of battling. But her own attorney said to me that she was persistent and the court wasn't used to that. They wanted her to just acquiesce and go with what they wanted. And if you don't do that, there are problems.
That's right. Ladies, you are saving lives. I'm honored that you were willing to come on and talk about this. You are helping so many people. And most importantly, you're preventing people from getting into these relationships and getting into these situations and giving them a guide and a blueprint, but most importantly, making them feel heard and seen. And so thank you both so much. I think you're amazing, and don't ever stop fighting. Don't ever stop doing this. I will do everything in my power to make your voices heard, to make the book known. And thank you both for taking the time to do this. Before we go, can you guys just tell everybody where to find you, and again, where to find your book, and all of that good stuff?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram at Freedom Warrior Tribe, and my website is freedomwarrior.info. Our book is in pre-order right now. You can learn about it at narcfreepress.com. Our official release date is October 1st for a reason, the first day of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So we encourage everybody to grab a copy. You can also join our book launch team. We have a group on Facebook. So if you want to help us spread the word, we would love that. But Dr. C, you want to tell them about Goodreads also?
Yeah. So if you want to go onto Goodreads and just all you have to do is go in there, find our book. You have to put in the whole title, Framed Woman in the Family Court Underworld, and then you can click Want to Read. That would be fantastic. I mean, if we could have just more people doing that, that helps the algorithm and gets the book information out there for people. And of course, if you want to leave a review about why you think this book will be helpful to other people, we would appreciate a review there also. Probably take you 5 minutes. And again, the idea is to truly, there's a movement going on now. There's no denying that, but we need a thrust. We need a thrust of this movement. And people can find me at Course of Control Consulting, and I'm on Instagram, Dr. C _ Course of Control. So same thing on Twitter, etc.
And I'll include links.
Perfect.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you.
I will include a link to the Goodreads. I'll include a link to the pre-orders and everything I'll leave in the show notes. So everybody can access that easily.
Perfect. Thank you
so much.
Thank you guys so much.
It's a village. We're a huge sea of allies. We've got it going.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. I hope you found it useful, but most importantly, I hope you found it validating. Want to work one-on-one with me? Visit my website at drjamiezuckerman.com to book a personalized coaching session, and be sure to check out my on-demand workshops on topics like co-parenting with a narcissist, life after leaving, anxiety management strategies, and more. Again, that's drjamiezuckerman.com. You'll also find links to my interactive workbooks, merchandise, resources, and newsletter sign-up. Next Up Narcissism is as much your podcast as it is mine. I want to hear your feedback and what you want to hear. So make sure to leave a podcast review wherever you listen, or send an email to nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Again, that's nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to tune in next week to see what's up next on Next Up Narcissism.